Apa kabar? That's how do you do in Malaysia's national language. And so, yeah, welcome everyone to the Christmas episode of the Product Uncensored show. I'm your host, Colin Pell. And if you're like me, where Q4 has been the craziest quarter of the year, I hope you're hanging in there okay. Do take care of yourself and take a good break after. Back to the show. If you're new here, you might find the following information helpful. Our videos are on YouTube. And as usual, I have a special request. If you are watching our videos on YouTube, please click on the like button and also on the subscribe, the little bell icon that happens to come up here. Because that really helps us get discovered as well. That shows your intent. And, if you know all this algorithm stuff, it's always good. Secondly, if you're listening on our podcast, we're available on all major podcast platforms, and it should show up here. Hey, see, I got it right this time. Woohoo! And finally, if you want to support this show, again, purely voluntarily, it is down here in the description. You can support the show for the price of a coffee. Yeah, that's all you need to know if you're new. Other than that, welcome back, everyone. Today is episode 30, and this episode is all kinds of special. And I'll tell you why. Number one, it is episode number 30. So it is amazing to think that I've managed to do this for 30 episodes. I wasn't sure whether I would go past one. So 30 is kind of good. Second, it's the final episode of the year. And then, yay, we get 2022. Hopefully not as crappy year next year as it has been this year. Well, it was still better than last year. But anyway. And also, we have our first guest that is based out of New Zealand. So that's also very impressive. But I think the most important thing of why this episode is special, I'll get to that in a little bit. But let's introduce today's guest. Many in Malaysia, you probably remember him as the community leader of Big Data Malaysia, VR Malaysia. I mean, he was based in Malaysia for 5 years. This man has been many things. He's been a QA manager. He's been a director of product management. He's been a head of engineering. He's been a CIO, a CTO, and he's currently the CPTO of Weirdly, a hiring platform in New Zealand. He is none other than Mr. Daniel Walters. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Thanks, Colin. This last couple of years really must have warped our sense of time, because I was there in Malaysia with you for 10 years.
Yeah, that's true. Oh my gosh, you're right. Sorry, 5 years with me, and then he spent another 5 years with Seek. So yes, I'm sorry, my maths is totally short and rubbish. So you are absolutely right. Thanks for joining.
Pandemic, man. Just blame it on the pandemic.
Thanks so much for joining the show. Because he's based in New Zealand, it was quite a difficult exercise in trying to find the right time. So Dan has been very accommodating. So thank you so much. So let me get back to why this show episode is super special. It's because this man is the reason why I'm in product management today, and he's probably had the biggest influence on my career thus far. So that's why it's super special, and it's always a little bit intimidating and exciting to interview your ex-boss. But that's the main reason why this episode is special. So then we got a lot to talk about. We're probably going to go down memory lane quite a bit, but I think it would be fantastic to maybe start off with what you currently do, maybe a bit about your company, and a bit about yourself.
Cheers. Well, this is special for me too, Colin, and we can go into why later. So I'm Chief Product and Technology Officer for a company based out of New Zealand called Weirdly. We help retail businesses and other businesses hiring frontline roles on volume. So a lot of application tracking systems and other recruitment platforms are very focused on professional roles and not great at dealing with volume and not great with dealing with frontline. So we're very focused on that area, and we work with big brands like Kmart and Target. So I've been in the role relatively short period of time, about 6 months full time, probably a little bit longer because I did some contracting for them earlier. But yeah, it's a continuation of some of the work I was doing at Seek for 5 years. So yeah, and we made the move over to Auckland, so that's also been a big change for us.
Yeah. So for those of you who haven't kind of caught it from his accent, he's actually Australian who's now living in New Zealand, which for Australians, I guess, I've heard all the jokes about how, New Zealand is just the state of Australia. They should just, be part of Australia already. So I guess it would be somewhat, it's different now that you're the one who's in New Zealand and no longer in Australia. But yeah, I don't know. I just always thought that play on each other was always fun. It's like Malaysia and Singapore. So.
Yeah, and I think this might come up a bit later as well, but having worked for a long time in Melbourne and then for a long time in KL and across the Southeast Asian region, and now just over a year during my time with Xero and then with Weirdly, here in Auckland, New Zealand. Just the contrast between the different locations has been really interesting and a real sort of learning aspect for me as well.
Okay, yeah. So let's not go into that because I really want to. Yeah, I've got that as one of the things that I really want to talk about, like the different locations and how, what you've seen. So yeah, let's keep that for a little bit later. Let's jump into your time at Hitwise, right? Because I think that's where you kind of cut your teeth in product management. So tell us a bit more about that, because I think you were like QE manager and then you went into product management. How did that happen? Like, why and the how and the what?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of even predates Hitwise in that I had been in the tech industry, first in games development, and the insurance industry, the IT side of that before, and always been adept at changing sort of roles and pitching in where I could. I joined Hitwise. Basically, I had worked with the CEO before at a games company called Beam. And we had sort of gone our separate ways. And then sort of a year later, after I'd done some travel, he rang up and said, "Hey, we've just had a big issue with a launch in the UK, and we feel like we need some more quality assurance. You always had a sort of a customer-centric sort of point of view. Can you come in and help with that?" And so I took some of that games development experience where I had focused on quality, and then brought that into Hitwise. But I had studied software engineering. I had always been a hobby programmer since like 12. And so it was quite natural to step between, fairly technical quality side of things and back into like software development. And then over time, that grew to actually a relatively short time because it was a startup that was moving really quickly, into leading teams and being sort of that, player coach type role. And then later on, realizing that needed to step out of that, day-to-day programming role and could be more effective at leading and getting the best out of the people around me. And then the shift to product management was, I could, I'd been an engineering leader for a few years and found lots of ways to be more efficient. But I realized the biggest step up in efficiency would be building the right stuff. And, the thinking around product management was starting to evolve and be more of a discussion in the industry at that point. Pragmatic marketing were putting out really good material. And so, I made the business case for the business. Like, we actually need product managers. And so I was one of the first couple of people who took those roles. So that's how it came about.
Interesting. So, sorry, I'm gonna reveal a little bit about how long you've been in the industry, which may inevitably give rise to guesses and suspicions about your age. But yeah, so it was at this time. I think it was like 2003, 2004. And at this point in time, agile software development was like so new. The new tech product management is kind of evolving, is still finding its feet. How did you sort of get yourself in the know? Because even by the time I joined you in Hitwise and I started product management, there's already so much content. But what was the scene like, the product scene like when you joined, how different was it?
Yeah, I mean, for me, other approaches were just not making a lot of sense. And so being in the quality area, but having, both an empathy for the people who use the software and a software engineering, background in terms of education, I was always in that nexus of what the process would be in terms of how we worked. How'd we get the code written and deployed and take feedback and bring it back to the team. So even back when I was working at virtual communities, we brought in Rational's iterative process. It was like a really pared down, of their much heavier Rational unified process. But it was at that point in time, like this is late 90s, professing, weekly or fortnightly sprints, that sort of thing. And so that felt like, I felt we needed feedback, and I didn't know the term agility, but that just seemed to make so much sense to me. Like if it was shorter, we'd get more feedback. We'd pick up issues earlier, we'd fail faster, so those principles. And it was only later, probably 2000, as you say, 2004, where we start to be able to put some words to it and actually picked up on, concepts like Scrum and XP and things like that.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So here's an interesting anecdote as well, and this is where we inevitably go down memory lane a little bit. I still remember when I was interviewing for that product role in Hitwise, and I think one of the questions you asked was, tell me about agile development, and I still remember I read up about it because I didn't have any experience at the time. Read out about it, and I'm like, yeah. So I was literally like regurgitating whatever I'd read. Nice, and I still got the job. So I was fairly surprised. I thought I wouldn't get it. So
it was probably one of it's probably one of the least useful questions that I asked over the interview. Like we were essentially just trying to gauge awareness and things like that. If you remember the format of those interviews, it was much more like very hands-on and scenario based.
Yes.
And yeah, like the most important part I felt was, you had different audiences to speak to. And so we tried to simulate that. And I still to this day think it was one of the most effective ways of identifying people with product management potential in a market where there wasn't lots of people who had worked in that role before.
Yeah, I fully agree. And just to let you know, I still incorporate a lot of elements of that interview experience into even now my current process, because I just felt that it was so different. And over the years, it has stood the test of time. Obviously, I've adapted it, and I'm here and there. But yeah, a lot of them still hold true. So thank you so much for that. So even in the hiring space, I've learned so much from that interview process as well. So that was fantastic. All right. Sorry. Let's not get too nostalgic, because I'm sure everybody else wants to know about the good stuff. But so QA to product management, and you were saying you've had a background in software development as well, and you make that step into product management. So here's the question, right? Technical versus non-technical product management. And in your case, we'll cover this a little bit later, but maybe I'll just bring it forward and ask you anyway. Technical versus non-technical product leadership as well. Like how big of an influence do you think this is into being an effective product leader or product manager, and why?
Yeah, it's a good question. I almost have an allergic response to sort of functional ways of thinking about people's roles. I certainly think domain knowledge, any domain knowledge, is useful. And so I probably see the technical knowledge as just being more domain knowledge. And there's no person on the planet that has all the domain knowledge, right? Because it's just there's just so many topics, so many things. So tend to suggest people focus on, who the value you're trying to deliver is for, and then working backwards from that. And if you've, like I lean on engineering knowledge that I picked up over the years, and that's helpful. But would I say that, people who don't have that would be a less effective product manager? No, I don't think so, because they've got so much, they could have all sorts of domain knowledge about, the industry that they're delivering value within, all sorts of stuff. So maybe I'm rejecting the premise of the question. I'm not sure, but that's my perspective.
Yeah. So good. I mean, this isn't exactly like a new question, and I'm sure your answer has been around as well. So I guess that the follow-up question for you would be like, okay, so how do we then make the best call to know when should we lean on a person's technical experience or technical expertise versus when we lean on a person's potential or non-technical expertise? And again, this is more just like how you've done it in your career.
Yep. Yeah. I mean that is always something that requires judgment, which is hard for the listeners at home, because it's like, well, how do I go acquire judgment? So then the things that I am always very interested in, and I'm having listened to your show, know that quite a number of the other people you've interviewed sort of share the same view, very much understanding why, the why of things and how that fits together. And sometimes as you're picking through that and going like, all right, we know what we need to achieve, we know the why behind it, so we can understand whether we're heading in the right direction or not, and from that perspective going, okay, well then based on this gap, I know I don't have this expertise, so but that expertise may be within someone within my team. So trying to make those judgment calls of going, hey, I could have the ego and say, oh, well, maybe I know a bit more about this, but I haven't done that for 5 years. So probably this person who's doing it every day, I should go and ask them for some advice on their perspective on this particular problem we're working on. So yeah, applying judgment. I would say always be aware that you're in a product management position. You can be in both a very weak position and in a very powerful position, depending on who you're dealing with. And so, knowing when to lean on your team members and when to, collect all the different perspectives and then how to synthesize that's a really key part of the role.
That was a really good way. So sorry, I'm still gonna push this a little bit more. And this time I want to switch it from the point of view of a product manager or an aspiring product manager, right? So assuming I am because this question it recently came up a little bit, I've been seeing it on my LinkedIn feed as well, is aspiring product managers who don't have the technical expertise, right? And a lot of them have been asking, so how then do I break into product management, accelerating your career into product management? And I guess what would be your advice or any thoughts that you would give as from the perspective of a hiring manager of how do these people like bring out the best, even if let's say you don't have technical expertise, or sorry, let me frame the question a little bit differently. What would be the best way as an aspiring product manager, whether you're technical or whether you're non-technical, right? Because I think like you said, there's different situations, and as the hiring manager, you need to apply judgment. So when I flip the question around to the person who is trying to get the job, how can we do best to then influence and tell the hiring manager, I'm your guy or I'm your girl? So
I mean, one of the interesting things around the product management role is some businesses really sort of merge in their thinking project management and product management. You know what I mean? And so then this is how you can get yourself in a knot of thinking about, well, the technical expertise about what is possible is really, really important for this role. The reality is I actually think the superpower that any aspiring product manager can have is the ability to empathize with the users they're creating value for being able to synthesize knowledge from many different sources, being able to communicate about it. So I would, always put my emphasis whenever. And look, I actually did this recently. Like I applied for a contract with Xero, and so I had to go through an interview process. Look, it helps that I had the experience I had and those sorts of things. So that probably smoothed the way a bit, but I still had to front up to the interview and answer some of these sorts of questions. And so I tend to actually play down the technology part because I'm much more focused on the outcomes. And look, you can use some of that knowledge to chart a path, but I'm much more like to lean on the people around me because they're the ones that have to deal with the consequence of the choices that we make.
Yeah. Okay. Well said. So, yeah, I think that was a really, really good point, right? Sometimes, I think it's really not about your technical, non-technical skills, right? You show how you can empathize with the user, understand the problem, and yeah, you're probably a much better space than whoever can, blab about how well they can code or how well they can write a business use case. Yeah. Good point.
Yeah. It's easy to get caught on a particular snag and going, oh, I'm blocked because I'm not technical enough, and to be really worried about that. A great skill for product managers is lateral thinking, right? And I tend to be like, well, is that actually the snag, or is the puck actually over here, and should we be skate over that way? So yeah, that's a much easier area to differentiate in.
Nice. Okay. Sorry. Let's move on a little bit. Because again, like your resume is so impressive. Too many questions to ask, not enough time. So in your career, you've actually done like this switch between product to engineering to CIO, CTO, and then now back to combination of both. How easy or how hard is it to switch between? And the reason why I asked this, I'll give you the context first, I think, so that there's a bit more information there, is because we see, I see, it's unfair to say we, that the trend is that product management tends to be not the end goal, or rather not the end step, right? A lot of people then branch out into something else. The most common is obviously being founders, but also like in your case, they became engineering or CIO, C-level suites. And for you, what were the biggest changes that you needed to make in order to adapt to these roles, right? Because they're not like fully product roles anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it was an interesting one. So let's take the seekasia role as an example, because over those 5 years, for the first 4, I was wearing the CIO and CTO hat. Look, I can be very honest here. I was fairly naive. The whole role was described very much focused around the CTO responsibilities. And so I interviewed and answered all the questions around that, and they hired me. It turned out that the CIO aspects of the role, that is, being responsible for the IT for, the 8 countries that they were operating in, for the 30 plus offices, for the network infrastructure that linked all of that and supported the products, for the data centers we run the products out of. That was actually a bigger part of the overall role. So here I was going, all right, I'm going into this, awesome CTO position for 2 of the leading brands, JobsDB and JobStreet. And look, I did plenty in that space, but I did even more in the CIO responsibilities. I mean, Southeast Asia is a very volatile space. There were changes of government, there were, volcanoes erupting, there were earthquakes, there were floods, there was like literally every week there was something threatening the IT infrastructure. And it's where a lot of my grey hairs came from. But I approached it with, again, sort of user-centered thinking I approached it like a product manager, and I approach being a CTO like a product manager, like, being user-centered. So like, we made big changes that, are often the sorts of changes that people hate, putting in like VPN systems that everyone needs to use and things like that. But I took it from the angle of, well, what's a great experience going to be for the people that are going through this change? What's the appropriate change management approach we could do in terms of communicating and helping people see a change coming? So it was like, there were so many transferable skills from my experience as a product manager. And I think it actually made me, not immediately, but over time, a reasonably successful CIO. And I actually think this is where most CIOs fail, because a lot of CIOs I meet are very, are not very user-centered and make very big changes to organizations that most of the users hate. And, there's definitely a better way.
I agree. Yes, I will say that, in my career as well, I have worked with, CTOs or CIOs who really, they major on the technical side of things, and it usually comes at the cost of, people, and empathizing with the people both internally and externally. So
I'm sure you and I both experienced at Experian various changes that were IT changes that drove us as users mad.
Yes,
and
yes.
3 or 4 years later, that it was the same change would be done again, but in a much better way. And you go like, why didn't we just do it like that the first time? Like,
Yeah, why didn't we just, spend a bit more time thinking about it, spending a bit more, do it right, instead of trying to do it 3 times and
engage the people that were involved in the change, all those sorts of things.
Okay, I've got a sort of unrelated question to the product space, but heck, it's my show. I can do what I want. So I'm sorry, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What do you think were the biggest differences between a CIO and a CTO? Because this is one area which I've tried to read up about CIOs and CTOs, and the trend that I observe is that usually a company either has a CIO or a CTO. It's not common to have CIOs and CTOs in my, at least in what I've seen. What are the biggest differences between the two? And why do we need one or the other?
It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, I think I may have shared just before a serviceable description for a CIO. So, and even simpler is just thinking about them running the infrastructure and operational things that are running the business. CTOs, which are, again, there can be different flavors, but are often focused on the product development, the innovation, those things. For larger companies, it is not uncommon to have a CIO with, a CTO and a CDO, Chief Data Officer, reporting into them. So, like the larger the company, the wider those concerns are, the more complex they are, and so you start to see those roles split down that way. And so, I mean, within Experian and Seek, they definitely had all of those job titles and more. And the CTO responsibilities, I mean, in a nutshell, I think it's very important that there is someone responsible for negotiating what the qualities of the products and services you're delivering are going to be. So that could be through the lens of the functionality, but it also could be like, where do we need great user experience? Where do we need performance? Those sorts of things. It's important for those roles to work hand in hand, so I guess it was pretty easy given I was wearing both hats. But it was also not easy because that was way too broad a set of responsibilities for one person. And so the only thing you can do, hire a great leadership team underneath you and get to work.
Yes, I agree. I think I remember someone was saying like, one of the guests on the show was saying that, you don't hire, who you like, but the best way to hire would be to hire people who complement the skills you don't have, or the skills that you don't, or the areas you don't focus on, just so that, you get a great team. So I think that really jives in with what you said as well.
For sure.
Mm-hmm. The other part about the role that you had in Seek, both as CIO and at CTO as well, is, I wanted to pick your brain a little bit, because in that role, you were working with a CPO as well. And for those of you who don't know, he was working with, Dan was working with Ken Chin, who I've had on the show, another amazing product leader, another person who's had a lot of influence on the way I think about product. So yeah, how is it like to work with a CPO, you being the CIO, and you've had all these product experiences? Like, is that easy? Like, does it,
Well, I mean, with Ken, if you look at his resume, he's got a mix of product and engineering background. And he'd started off in the sort of the multimedia space,
Yes.
an area I dabbled with. So there was just like, our careers, both snake sort of back and forth. So we had just lots of commonality in terms of knowledge and experience, but also in terms of philosophy as well. And so we quickly, agreed, like, because the history being we had JobCB and JobStreet, two businesses acquired that need to be brought together. So we're like, we need to transform the organization. So we're going to co-lead a product development organization. And so that's how we organized it from day one, which meant we could cover each other on various things. So sometimes if I was unavailable, Ken would come in and wear the engineering hat. Sometimes I would be in there and wear the product hat, which was why, in the last year and a half, I was wearing a product director hat in addition to some of my technology responsibilities. So yeah, that was a scenario where we could work really well together.
So this is going to be another one of those, like, very apparent questions, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Like, it would always be that when you're leading the product function within an organization and you have a counterpart who's in the technology function, you have to work well together. So that kind of goes without saying. But what do you think happens when that doesn't work? Like, what or I don't know whether you've experienced it before, but like, what would be the biggest problems that you would see if they don't work together? I mean, obviously we can, arguments and stuff like that, but I'm speaking like from the health of the product perspective. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we had a really complex and challenge in front of us. So just to use real life experiences, Ken and I, like any partnership, had our ups and downs as well. And so to contrast, like, when things were working well, we were communicating to our teams in sync, a very clear vision of the organization we wanted to be, how we wanted to work, what we wanted to achieve, those sorts of things. And when when we had misunderstandings, or and there was plenty of times where I was distracted or he was distracted, or those sorts of things, we would very quickly see that the wheels start to come off, and realize that, actually, no, we're going to get together and we're going to lock ourselves in a room and we're going to, talk through some stuff, get aligned and find great ways to communicate the direction again with our teams. So, when it's not working, and you've got 250 people relying on you, then all of a sudden it causes a lot of friction, which just, goes all the way through the organization. And so that, that just makes things worse. And so, that alignment and having a common understanding becomes really important. Which is, still some of the stuff I write quite a lot about these days, as does Ken, if you look at what he's been outputting over the last couple of years as well.
Yep. Yeah, and sorry, just to continue down your experience as well. You've worked with organizations where there are multiple offices, multiple teams, and one of the biggest challenges in any product function, I think, is what you just mentioned, alignment, right? Because it's easy to at the top level say we're going A, this direction is A, this is what we're doing, this is how we're going to get there. And then quickly realize that when it goes further down the hierarchy, it gets diluted and then it gets misinterpreted. And then, you just realize that things are not really going A. It's like A+2 or A-2 or something like that. And how do you make sure, or you can't guarantee it, but yeah, what's the best way to keep this alignment going, especially after you started like a big project, like in Seek, you're saying that you're trying to reorganize the whole organization, right?
Yeah. So this is almost a whole podcast on its own, I reckon, or maybe a podcast series. But there are so many elements to this, and so let me name a few, but I can in no way be exhaustive.
Understood. Yeah.
One of the key areas, and people who follow my blog focus on outcomes will see this from what I've written about. So goal setting and things like that is useful. So like when we talk about alignment, if you actually think about what needs to happen inside two or more people's brains to be aligned on a thought, it's actually it's amazing that we ever understand each other at all. There are, things, approaches like OKRs, but, and that seems to be the flavor of the moment. It doesn't really matter what framework, but a simple way of communicating idea and then different types of evidence that could help triangulate that idea, I have found over my career has been, is a very effective way to at least get people maybe not completely on the same page, but at least within the same ballpark.
Hopefully same book.
Yeah. To build upon that, like, if you're then aligned from, like you've put the effort in to establish a culture, you've established the purpose of each of the roles and each of the teams within the organization. If you have communicated a vision and purpose for the organization, these things help line up things even more, but it's still not the whole picture.
Yeah.
I talked about logic before, like, understand, like logic is the why behind things. Like you can have a goal, but if two people think it's been done for two different reasons, they will very quickly go off track. So, OKRs don't teach you how to align on the why, they teach you how to align on the what. But you still can be, going in different directions because you think you're doing it for two different reasons. You know what I mean? So there is so much effort to actually get real alignment. And when you're talking about, 250 people, then every part of that effort pays off. How you communicate and the frequency of your communication also feeds into this. Like there's just so many elements to in creating alignment.
Yeah, and I think the challenge is always like in the case of your time at Seek, and I think even at Hitwise, is that the organization is distributed, it's big, and so there are a lot more opportunities for mishaps to happen as well. And I think that's why the roles of leadership in much bigger organizations tend to be all about making sure people, reiterating the same thing and trying to build habits. But if, let's say, I switch gears now and I kind of go into your role at Weirdly at this point in time, I believe it's a much smaller setup compared to, Seek. How does that change in terms of now trying to get alignment? Because now alignment is within a much smaller subset of leadership, much smaller team. And I believe Weirdly is all in the same time zone, at least. So yeah, how does that differ from, working within a big enterprise and trying to get alignment there?
Yeah, I mean, there's some overlapping set of challenges, but there's also different challenges. Like, the size of the organization, where it's at in terms of its maturity, how many customers it has, how much financial runway it's got. All of those elements, change things quite a bit. Of course, being aligned is still, very valuable, but you may have different biases towards, like, when you have a very short financial runway, I believe in outcomes are a very useful orientation to be thinking about things, but you need to know a path towards what you're doing and when you're doing it very quickly. So I like to frame things in terms of outcomes. I like to give the context about why we're doing it, but also can very quickly link the actions that we're going to take as well. You may have a little bit more time to work with when you're in a larger business with, a secure income stream, et cetera, et cetera. So, you have to be context aware.
Yeah. So I guess the reason why I was asking about how when you switch into a smaller organization, I think it's exactly because of what you said, right? Usually in early stage startups or smaller startups, your runway is one of the key concerns, if not the primary concerns. And, you read about a lot of this, hustle culture, like we got to hustle, and, you got to do it until you make it. And then you can go into the whole, now we can slowly roll out stuff and everything like that. But one of the challenges with this whole notion of having to hustle and trying to find product market fit is that you could end up just being this feature factory where you're continuously throwing stuff at the wall. And how do you make sure that, even within a small organization, that you're taking the time to really focus on just one key area or two key areas, and not, keep doing things, like the person A who's heading this team or who is the team, doing this, and person B and team B, they're all doing very almost similar sounding stuff, but actually it's not. And then it's pulling you in different directions. So it's like a microcosm of the problem that you'd have in a big enterprise, right?
Yeah, it is. And there are elements of the hustle culture which are very good. Like the, action can generate opportunities, whereas inaction generates nothing. So, you know what I mean? Like, but by the same token, it's easy to get sort of addicted to that because you can then just do.
Exactly.
And, like just waste a lot of time and also not get anywhere because you're doing that activity in the wrong place. So it's not, it may reveal opportunities, but it might reveal opportunities that are just not useful for your business. So things that we spent a bit of time doing this year was we wanted to keep the hustle aspect. We wanted to be very clear about where it was best applied. We're a small company. We're still trying to grow and trying to get that hockey stick shape. But we also have massive customers like Kmart and Target. So we had to be like we use some concepts from Kent Beck, which is from his 3X, where it's like, well, these activities, this is where we actually need to discover and break new ground. So we are going to have a lot of action in those areas because it's the right space to dig. But in this other area where we actually need stability and resilience because we want to retain a marquee customer, then we need a different way of working. And so you had to balance those. And then thirdly, just to be very focused, spending time, even when you feel like you don't have time, as a leadership team, aligning on your thinking. Like, what's this business about? What's our imperative? Why are we here? What are we trying to achieve? What does each of us want to get out of this business? All of those things, the more alignment we have with that, the less likely we're all pulling in 10 different directions.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm going down the path of, really picking your brain on, smaller startups. We've covered the enterprise. So how do you draw that line between giving autonomy to a team versus making sure that people are not going off tangent, right? Because you want them moving the same direction, but you want to give autonomy as well. So in your experience with Weirdly, how do you do that effectively, especially for people in product roles specifically?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I might answer this just broader than Weirdly, because it fits into my overall thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I borrowed quite heavily from stuff that John Cutler has written about, how you can approach delegation and things like that. And the reality is, the context for different individuals and different teams are different, right? So, and that can depend on trust and capability, level of experience, all those sorts of things. So thinking about and being intentional about the types of degree of autonomy and what you're going to delegate to different individuals is step one. And John's got a really helpful diagram of different levels. Like, you could be delegating, you're going to be responsible for the strategy, the business model, everything about this part. That's all going to be you. And there's things we do Weirdly where we've done exactly that with some individuals. And then there's others where it's a far I don't want to use the word tighter leash, but it's probably the expression. Like, it's far more close working. But it's purely based on the experience level of the person or the team that you're working with.
Okay. Nice. So let's continue talking about your current role at Weirdly. You are the Chief Product and Technology Officer. And this is something that has been emerging in the tech space, like this CPTO role. In fact, even within Southeast Asia as well, I've been hearing more and more of this role where people are coming and asking, hey, do you know anyone who would make a good CPTO? And I'm curious because you're in that role, and I want to understand, like, what would be the big change between having the product and technology roles centered in one person or one team versus having two distinct roles, which is more traditional, which is your, CPO and then CTO?
Yeah, I mean, I've always wondered about the split in responsibilities. Like, you can split up responsibilities in many different ways, and my preference has generally been towards splitting based on different purposes. But a lot of the way that people understand product and technology, may be divided as much by the function and the sets of skill sets people have, which can be a different point of view. There's also been the notion of, by having two sides of the debate, people coming from I'm the champion of the user and what they need, and I'm the champion of the technology and what we need for that to run great, then the debate between that is going to give us the best, most objective outcome, which I think in times gone by, when we didn't have great definitions of what success looks like and ways to measure what a great service or a great software look like, probably made sense. In today's reality, the industry and the roles and the way we approach software development has matured a lot, and so I challenge, that way of organizing teams makes sense in the same way that it used to. What I will agree with, though, is the grouping of all product and all technology responsibilities in one role is still a very broad role. And so I think in the future, it's just that it's split up differently. It's not down that traditional, product on one side and engineering on the other. Maybe it's more around what are the different responsibilities and what that contributes to the business. Maybe it's split down into the growth responsibilities. Some is around the responsibilities of keeping everyone safe within the company. Some of them might be split down into particular parts of the value chain that you're delivering on. So I just think that you can organize roles in a different way, and just because it made sense 10 years ago or 20 years ago doesn't mean it will make sense 10 years from now.
Yeah. I think one of the areas where I've seen this the dynamic play out is, I think it really looks at, when you're looking at the outcomes, right? If the engineering function are having a set of outcomes that's purely based on just, sorry, I'm phrasing it as a question, by the way. I just realized it sounded more like a statement. That, if it's just focused on outcomes that are purely technology based with no real line of, no link to the outcome, especially for the end customer. Yeah. Is that an example of where you're saying that it kind of doesn't work? Because that's where I see like a lot of traditional companies where they have, the product function and the engineering function, is that they tend to have two different roadmaps that sort of like roll up into this one big roadmap or one big vision. But the engineering focus has always been on the engineering excellence side of things. And then that could, I've seen where it clashes as well. It's like, no, we should do this because it works for the customer. And they're coming back because, no, but, we have to do it this way because this is a technically superior way.
Yeah. So everyone working in our industry has seen the friction of this approach, and it basically leads to non-optimal prioritization across businesses, and it's like that scene on Contact. If you can't remember it, just look it up on YouTube afterwards, where they build the spaceship and they go, but there's no chair in there, so we better add a chair. And so they launch, and traveling through interventions, and the chair is shaking, like just ridiculously shaking. There's, she's very uncomfortable. And then at some point, the chair breaks off, and all of a sudden, all the friction's gone, and everything is working perfectly. Well, this is what I like in my experience to thinking, starting with outcomes and working backwards. Like it's, debating whether, it's priority A over, this engineering investment, or priority B over this feature is very, very easy when you understand your customers very well and you're looking at what's impacting them the most. And, if it's the slowness of your search engine, fix that. If it's the, they can't get a job to be done that's really important to them because they're missing a particular capability in your product, fix that. As soon as it devolves into like politics between functional departments, you're back to that. It's the seat trying to rock itself off its perch again. So it's just like, in the same way when Ken and I were co-leading the team, this solved that same problem for us because we just worked on an overall set of outcomes we were trying to achieve. We would do, we'd draw out result maps of, essentially like trees of OKRs that sort of laid out. And then we could talk apples to apples about, what was going to be the next most important thing to help our customers. And it was very serene. It was very easy to have those conversations. And yet most other organizations rocking themselves to the nuts and bolts come off. Okay. Another question, just since we're talking about like prioritization as well, since you mentioned, this question came to me. In
in smaller organizations, especially if you're in a startup, one of the challenges is always, how do you walk that fine line between, building new stuff that's going to bring value to your user base or your client base versus, trying to make sure that you're fixing, some of these little nuts and bolts that you've decided to gloss over during your MVP launch, and then making sure that you fix it before it finally comes off, the wheels finally come off. I'm sure your answer is going to be like, yes, focus on the outcomes, but can you dive a little bit more into the details of like how you would do that in a smaller organization?
Yeah. So, I mentioned 3X before.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, know which context you're in.
Yep.
So there are definitely some contexts where you're like, if we try this and it invalidates our hypothesis, then we're throwing what we just did out. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So, don't be gold plating that. Don't spend 6 months on that if you could spend 6 minutes. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Do that do that with a paper prototype, or with a low code, no code solution. Do that in the cheapest possible way. Get out of the building, talk to customers, and then there are other things where you go like, we are adding things which are going to be around for a long while. And now that's easier to judge when you've had more experience in the industry. But, great examples within Weirdly, we've got functionality which we know that, is useful for customers like the Kmart group and Target group, etc. So we make sure we build those really well. We work in very short, like 1 week sprint iterations, and we work really hard on having daily feedback amongst all the different team members collaborating. It's a small development team, 6 people, and that works really well for us. We're able to deliver a good level of quality that is resilient. And so, that's how we maintain the balance. There's other things that we've worked on this year, which we know are purely experimental, and we know that there's debt which we'll fix up later, and we know that we don't worry about that not being prioritized because we have conversations about risk regularly. We have conversations about where we're going regularly, and so it's not I better do it now because it won't get prioritized later. We trust in that prioritization process that we have.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Dan. I think it's been a great time just trying to make that contrast between how you function in big organizations versus when you then go into a small organization, the differences and things like that. So thank you for that. I want to move on to really talking about what you alluded to earlier when we started, which is the scene within the different geographical locations that you've been in, because you've worked in obviously in Australia, in Melbourne, you've worked in KL, and obviously within that experience as well, you covered a lot of Southeast Asia, and then now you're in New Zealand as well. Let's start with the contrast or the differences. What are the biggest differences that you've seen within the product scene between New Zealand, Australia, and Malaysia / Southeast Asia?
Yeah, another big question.
Sorry.
The scenes were, they were just different levels of evolution, and let's say maturity is the wrong word, but probably communicates what we mean. So I would say, interestingly, so Australia was slightly ahead, maybe a few years ahead, just in terms of going through the same sort of evolutionary steps as maybe Malaysia. So evidence of that was the types of roles that were available. There wasn't a lot of product managers. There wasn't a lot of people with who had worked in a DevOps type environment before, et cetera, et cetera. And interestingly, though, in the decade that I was in Malaysia, the investment in the startup scene and success of startup businesses that, even though they were known as Singaporean businesses, actually started in Malaysia, had actually, I would say like Malaysia startup scene wise is well ahead of where New Zealand is. Now, New Zealand is hotting up, and has had a bunch of successful exits recently, obviously some years ago now, Zero, but, recently Timely and other businesses like that.
Yep.
They're not, they're within 3 or 4 years of each other just in terms of the scene. Culturally, I think was the far more interesting differences. And, across Southeast Asia, there's things you notice immediately, like power distance and those sorts of things. What takes you, longer is realizing that every country across Southeast Asia, and even within each country within Southeast Asia, there are lots and lots and lots and lots of subtle differences, which if you want to navigate it successfully, you really have to understand. Like, a lot of Europeans going to Southeast Asia get it wrong by just assuming that everything is the same, because they go, all right, well, this is different in a very obvious way to where we came from, therefore everything is this way. And the reality is, no, it's there's a lot of subtle differences. We had teams in China, we had teams in Hong Kong, we had teams in Vietnam, we had teams in Malaysia. We also had different generational differences within the teams. So, so like there were just so many different experiences and motivations that people had gone through. So there was a lot to learn over the time I was there.
Very interesting. The thing that I found so interesting was you were saying that, the startup scene, you were saying in Malaysia seemed, more vibrant than the one in New Zealand, which was interesting because like you said, right, like Zero came out of New Zealand and Timely as well. So it's like, wow, very, very interesting. So,
don't get me wrong. Like it's less about the companies. It's more about like the support structure around it. And look, Malaysia has had its ups and downs as well, like the level of support. But I think, it's more like the number of like access to VCs, access to angel investors. It's more those sorts of things that, the patterns around all of that was well established over the time that I was there in Malaysia, and it seems to be it's present here now in New Zealand, but it feels like it's just been sort of worked out. It's just an interesting contrast.
It is. And so for you, what trends do you see? Like what are the future trends that you're anticipating within the product management space in APAC, right? Because like I said, you've had this brilliant opportunity to work, all the big countries within, APAC, and so what do you see anything interesting that's taking shape in terms of product management trends?
So again, this is a thesis that I write about on my blog, but one of the interesting patterns, a lot of people talk about outcomes over output. That's a more overt sort of trend that is certainly having a big impact in product management. And I think that's already landed. The thing that I think is following is then going, well, how does that apply more broadly across the organization? Like, at the moment, organizations are going, all right, let's think about outcomes. And the way we're going to do that is by setting quarterly OKRs. And you're like, well, that's just one step on a much longer journey. I mean, for one, OKRs are a tactical tool. It's not really about your strategy or your purpose or those sorts of things. Like, it's informed by that. But what I see is, the development of things like opportunity trees and result maps and just other tools that I think are great complements to goal setting frameworks like OKRs or PUMP or things like that. So I think that's a trend which is in that sort of early adopter phase, but I think over the next 5 years will be just the way that people think about how products and services fit within their organizations and how just how they prioritize.
Okay, very nice. And what do you think are like, if I were to ask you to pick, let's go again geographic in order of like geography, like what would be one strength that you would point out about one Malaysia, one Melbourne, and one Auckland or / New Zealand, what you've noticed within the product scene?
Let me drill into Malaysia. Malaysia is a country of small business owners, by volume more than anything else, and everyone, is at most only 1 or 2 degrees away from a small business owner. There's lots of family-owned businesses. And I have always thought that was one of the reasons why entrepreneurial thinking, connected there more than some of the surrounding countries. And of course, other things help, like big financial injections from the government and things like that. But the fact that people actually got how businesses worked, what the concerns were, and things like that, I think it's because it's close to home. It's they've been able to see it firsthand. They may have worked in the parent's shop or a factory or importing business or and so I've always seen that as an advantage of Malaysia. Australia, it feels like so long since I've been in Australia. It's a nice place with friendly people. I don't know.
It's okay.
I'm not sure. As an Australian, I'm not sure I'm great at being objective about it. I mean, we're pretty full of ourselves. The one thing that I think I really appreciate as an Australian abroad is direct communication. And I think there's plenty of things about being Australian I'm not proud of, but a bias towards direct communication is one of the things I'm very proud of. And I found that useful. It's a weakness of mine also, because I find it frustrating when people are not communicating.
And you were based 10 years in Asia, so
yeah, but I also, I mean, and I hope you're observing this as well, but I just feel like, I mean, Malaysia changed so much in 10 years of me being there. And, every year, like I always was involved in the startup scene, even when I was at larger companies, like I've always volunteered for coaching and things like that. So I've got to work with people straight out of high school and university, all the way through. And just the change of attitudes and the support and the way that, the teachers and lecturers spoke to them and what the expectations were. So, yeah, I just think there's a very bright future there. And so, yeah, it's that change is happening, and the culture is changing. Yeah.
What about New Zealand? We haven't covered New Zealand. What's the one thing that you would pick out about New Zealand?
I'm still sussing it out. I've spent 4 weeks in total in managed isolation. I've spent like 150 days in lockdown, some self-imposed and some some government mandated. I don't complain about that. I'm living in a nice neighborhood in a nice house, and the weather's been amazing for the just over a year I've been here. But I just haven't, I know the people that I'm working with. I know people at Zero. I know people at Weirdly. I've connected with a bunch of people online, but I really, it's meant that the learning process, has been a lot slower. I have learned that, direct communication it's more similar to Malaysia than it is to Australia, and that surprised me.
Yeah.
It's the other thing is everyone seems to know everyone, like multiple times. You'll call up a government agency and some Sandra, my wife, will call up and she grew up here and she'll say, can you help me with this service? And they'd say, "Oh, Hanchard, are you related to Hanchard?" Or so like the degrees of separation, is ridiculously small.
Wow.
And that just like that, we have experiences like that like every week. It's just like literally everyone knows everyone. So no, but still sussing it out. Ask me in a decade, then I'll be able to give as good a summary.
That's true. I mean, it just totally slipped my mind that when you got there and almost the entire time you were there, it's still been in COVID, and it hasn't been. It's not easy to suss out, the scene if you can't even get out. So yeah,
and also because we didn't anticipate another lockdown, so when I could have been out there and exploring more of Auckland and things like that, we just bought a house, so I was just busy putting things in the right room and things like that. So I sort of missed my window.
Okay, yeah, true. I'll come back to you in a decade, and then we'll have part 2 or part 3 of this. So, okay, thanks so much.
It'll be episode 300 or something like that.
Hopefully it'll be 300 by then. I don't know. For me, it's always one episode at a time, and then I'll figure out what I'm going to do from there. So, yeah. All right, let's go to the last section of the show. And as everybody knows, this is always my favorite part, where I ask the guests to recommend a song to the listeners. So then you chose a very interesting song. Why don't you tell us a bit more about it?
Yeah, so this is a Funky Space Reincarnation by Marvin Gaye. Musically, it's just an amazing track. It sits in a bunch of my playlists. I'm playing it over and over. I just think lyrically it's quite creative and fun and loose. So I enjoy that. I've picked a space background just to link,
Nice.
I've often when I want to subtly be in creativity mode, I will often turn up to work with a black t-shirt that has an astronaut on it. It just, it puts me in the right mood, and I think it also is just a little subtle unconscious signal to other people, of what mode I'm in as well. Marvin Gaye is just an amazingly talented person with, obviously a tragic life as well, but just had such a positive impact on people. And he's, it's a bit risky. It's a bit, it's a bit cheeky. It's a bit intellectual. I just love all of these elements, and it's funky.
It's funky. It's funky. Like I will admit I know Marvin Gaye because sexual healing, right? And but listening to this, it gave me all sorts of Jamiroquai vibes. I was like, oh, this is so funkily good. Yeah, so I was listening to it quite a bit as well. So yes, thank you for introducing that. And yeah, as usual, the link will be here. Yes, I've got it right. Yeah, and okay, yeah, really, really good. So yeah, check it out if you want. Do you play this when you work, or is this like your relax mode song? Like, when do you play this?
That's a good question. I think when I'm in an up mood, I think closer to the weekend, sort of, Friday nights, before the sun's gone down, or Saturday afternoons, before I might open a bottle of wine or something like that. I'm happy. I might share you also the longer playlist that it sits within. But yeah, it's just always gets me into my happy place. So yeah.
Nice.
It's normally followed quickly with some Curtis Mayfield and a lot of other
Curtis
stuff.
Mayfield. Nice. Okay. Thank you very much, Dan. We've unfortunately come to the end of this show, at least almost at the end. But before we go, do you have anything that you'd like to leave with our listeners and viewers of the show? Any pearls of wisdom? Any?
Yeah. So good question. I think that the headlines, and maybe it's always good to just repeat yourself a few more times. I think thinking in terms of outcomes is a good way to work. For millennia, we as people have been oriented around the doing, the how, the task of things, and we connect to that because it's very concrete. It's easy to describe. I'm not suggesting that you put that aside. That's still an important ingredient. What I am suggesting is working within a context, and the context is what you're trying to achieve, how you're going to change someone else's life, your business. Understanding those things are the things that help. Partnered with that is also understanding the why. I'm very much a person who works with the Socratic method. I ask a lot of questions. I still, in any role I've been, I'm still the person that asks the most questions. And I'm just like, actually, if you ask more questions than me, I think you're going to just be, you're going to be all right in life. It's going to help you. When students in Malaysia used to ask me, what's one thing I could do? Ask more questions. It will help you. So I think working in a way where you're oriented around the what, not the how. So that starting point, sitting behind that, you understand the why, and then you jump into the how, and then I think it's just it's a much better way to work, and it's the shift that's happening.
All right. Thank you so much. Fantastic. So everyone, that was the Chief Product and Technology Officer of Weirdly, Daniel Walters, on the show. And just, as we end, I just want to reiterate something that I posted on my LinkedIn just a few days ago. I've been very impacted by this line. It comes from Kevin Plank, the founder of Under Armour. And I think it really resonates with me because as someone in product, we have great responsibility, right? And I don't say that, just to show off that, we product people are so important, but I think we make very big decisions or we're responsible for that. And so, yeah, I'll leave this with you. Trust is built in drops and lost in buckets. And I'll definitely say that, not just as a product person, but even as a person in general, in life, you remember people who have trusted you, people who've put their trust in you. And you also remember those who've lost your trust very badly as well. And yeah, and I'm very happy to say, Dan is one of those people that I've really, learned to trust because he also put his trust in me. So yeah, find that person for yourself, within the professional space, within your personal space. And as you do product, always remember, with great power comes great responsibility. Have a great year end. Have a great ending to 2021. And I'll see you in 2022. Bye-bye.